What's up, Packer fans? Welcome into the Pack-A-Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. A slightly delayed episode today. I apologize for that, but appreciate your patience. Was at AEW in Milwaukee last night, an insanely fun show, but I got back at about 1 in the morning, and recording at 1 in the morning was definitely not going to happen. Was way too tired. So recording today on Wednesday morning. Like I said, slightly delayed, but I appreciate you joining me and appreciate your patience. So let's jump in right away. We had some Packer transactions from Wednesday that I want to get to. I also want to discuss that number 6 wide receiver battle. I also want to go over kind of just the wide receivers in general, because I think that's going to be a major takeaway from one of those major transactions on Wednesday. But let's start with the signings. The Packers picked up defensive lineman Abdullah Anderson, as well as cornerback Steven Denmark. I think first and foremost, this is probably, just some additional depth for this weekend to kind of get them through that final preseason game. But it's also an addition for both Abdullah and Denmark for potential practice squad spots, right? So it would be near impossible for either player to crack the 53 at this short notice, as well as, just one preseason game and just kind of learning the playbook and things like that. But definitely still an opportunity for either to go and show that they would be worthy inclusions of a practice squad spot. So they kind of get that introduction to the team, and they get to go out and show what they can do on the football field. And we'll see if they can maybe make a name for themselves on Saturday and get on the practice squad. But outside of that audition, this is more, again, just for depth this upcoming weekend. But again, that will certainly still be helpful against Buffalo. In other news, the Packers released one wide receiver in Chris Blair. The other wide receiver, of course, Devin Funchess, placed on IR, effectively ending his season. He cannot come back from IR since it was done before the 53-man roster cutdowns. They could eventually release him with an injury settlement, and he could sign 3 weeks after that. But this, in all likelihood, ends Devin Funchess' time with the Green Bay Packers before, let's be honest, it ever really began. Disappointing string of just everything for Devin Funchess, right? So 2 years ago, signs a big, almost $10 million deal with the Indianapolis Colts. Looks good. Looks like he's going to get to play with Andrew Luck in a Colts team that's contending. Instead, Luck retires. He plays his first game, looks good about midway through that first game. Actually, I think it was second half of that first game. He goes down with an injury, out for the entirety of the season. Signs a decent deal with Green Bay, considering he hadn't played the entire season, was injured, and opts out and doesn't play last year for reasons that were certainly understandable on Devin's side of things. Comes back this year, has the unfortunate faux pas, or just whatever you want to call it, incident, I guess is probably the best word for it, in the press conference, and then gets injured again. And the thing with Devin is, you could see leading up to the game where he got injured, like in the practices where he got injured, like he had been injured that week. He was playing through injury. You could just kind of see it. I don't think it was anything where the Packers were being irresponsible or anything like that. I think it was more of, he looked hurt. Devin thought he could probably play through it. Packers probably thought he could play through it. I don't even know if he aggravated anything, right? Could have been a totally different injury. But, you have to appreciate the fact that he wanted to go out there, compete for that spot, prove himself as a wide receiver, and then, of course, injures himself and now is on IR and missing basically his third straight season. So IR, opt-out, IR, and just a frustrating string of events for Devin Funchess. For the Packers, certainly disappointing as well. You expect to add him to a wide receiver core last year that definitely could have still used him. That, Alan Lazard, MVS, those guys definitely stepped up, but there would have been a role for Funchess on that team, no questions asked. Instead, again, he opts out last season, again, understandably. And then this season was battling for that number 6 spot. The question was going to be, did they want more special teams? Did they want a more pure wide receiver? Unfortunately, and he looked good that first preseason game, hauling in, 6 catches, almost, was it 60, 80 yards, somewhere in there? But unfortunately, again, he has the injury. This ends his time as a Packer. So frustrating for Funchess, frustrating for the Packers, frustrating for the Colts a couple seasons back, to say the least. But it's going to be tough now for Funchess, right? Like next year, he's probably going to get a vet minimum deal, no guarantees or very minimum guarantees to have to prove himself wherever he finds a spot in camp. But when you don't play for 3 straight seasons, you're definitely going to be behind the 8 ball for the remainder of your career until you prove you can stay healthy and still be effective. Now, from a Packers side of things, this definitely seems to clear up that number 6 wide receiver position, right? So it looked like, especially at the beginning of camp, it looked like there's just too many guys, right? You've got Devin Funchess, Malik Taylor, probably the special teams ace of the group and has improved as a wide receiver. Winfrey was having a heck of a camp. EQ was coming back. It's just like, how are you possibly going to only keep one guy out of those four? And at the end of the day, Funchess now is on IR. Winfrey hasn't played in weeks. EQ is practiced and played so sparingly that it's near impossible to consider him for that final spot. And now it just seemingly comes down to Malik Taylor. Maybe with a really good game, Reggie Begelton could get his name in that conversation, but I still think he's on the outside looking in. Right now, this seems like Malik Taylor or bust. And Malik Taylor's had a really nice camp, a really nice preseason so far. He did have the one drop last game, but outside of that, he's caught everything that's come his way. He's looked better after the catch. He looks still really good as a special teams player. So it looks like this is going to be Malik Taylor's spot. The one thing I would potentially ask or argue is with this wide receiver group the way that it is, and I brought this up earlier in the season as well, or in the offseason as well, do you really need that number 6 wide receiver on this roster? And what I mean by that is, again, this number 6 wide receiver is not going to play wide receiver, right? Your top 4 guys primarily in MVS and Lazard and Adams and Cobb are going to take almost all the snaps. Amari Rodgers probably gets some as a, kind of that Tyler Ervin role, right? That gadget type player. So you've got those 5 guys taking the snaps on offense. This number 6 guy is not going to play wide receiver, so he's going to be a core special teams guy. My question then becomes, if you're just keeping this as more of a special teams player, would you rather keep an extra safety? Would you rather keep a Christian Uphoff or an Ennis Gaines or a Vernon Scott than you would a Malik Taylor? Because one, I don't think Malik Taylor's getting claimed. Maybe he does, right? Maybe he gets claimed. I don't think you're necessarily losing sleep over it. And I still think you're going to get a couple of those guys. Maybe it's an EQ, maybe it's a Malik Taylor, maybe it's a Reggie Begelton. Maybe I think you're going to get a handful of those guys. Maybe if Winfrey can come back, you still get him back on the practice squad. If you can get 2-3 of those guys back on the practice squad, and remember still being able to call players up on game day, and the fact that number 6 wide receiver would only be activated for special team stuff anyway, I don't think that you're necessarily losing that much. So on the flip side, I think while Malik Taylor's a nice special teams player for a wide receiver, I think Vernon Scott, Christian Uphoff, Ennis Gaines, all are better special teams players. Just pure, if you're just basing it on special teams, I think they are. And I think all of those players have potential upside as a safety. So if it's me and I'm saying, all right, do I want to keep a 5th or 6th safety, or do I want to keep Malik Taylor as a 6 wide receiver? I think you can start making the argument that when it comes to special teams and when it comes to upside and players who may be claimed, I might want to keep those safeties. You could say the same thing about an extra linebacker, right? Would I rather keep Malik Taylor as a 6 wide receiver? Or would I rather keep Isaiah McDuffie or maybe a Ray Wilborn as an extra linebacker? I could make an argument too that I might rather have the extra linebacker, again, assuming I'm going to get a couple of those wide receivers back on the practice squad. So while I think it's Malik Taylor's, if they do keep 6, I think it's clearly Malik Taylor. I don't think they necessarily have to keep 6. I think the fact that they've got their 5 guys, and I think that number 6 receiver, especially with Funchess out, you hope to get a couple of those guys back in the practice squad, and you still probably feel really good about your overall depth. I think you kind of feel okay there. So still expect Malik Taylor to be the guy, but I do question whether or not they really need that number 5. But speaking of the wide receiver position here, what I want to wrap up with today is Randall Cobb and the addition of Randall Cobb and how sort of important that trade now kind of feels like and seems, right? At the beginning of camp, you're looking at, again, that whole wide receiver depth chart, and you're just saying, there's no reason to bring in Randall Cobb, right? You've got all of this depth, and you look like EQ is coming back, hopefully taking a step. Devin Funchess was going to be involved, of Malik Taylor. You brought in Amari Rodgers. You still had MVS, Lazard, Adams. There just didn't seem to be a need for another wide receiver, whomever it was. And Randall Cobb, especially just kind of coming in maybe a little bit more late in his career, it just looked like this was purely a, hey, let's make Aaron Rodgers happy type thing. But in hindsight, this move looks rather savvy and rather important, and give Aaron Rodgers credit for that, I guess, because Brian Gutekunst said, they weren't going to bring in Randall Cobb if it wasn't for Aaron. But you look at it now, EQ certainly has been hurt and hasn't taken any sort of step. Devin Funchess is on IR. Amari Rodgers looks good, but even Aaron Rodgers mentioned yesterday on McAfee, and this has been sort of apparent, I think, in both preseason and in training camp, he doesn't look quite ready yet. And that's not a knock on him, right? That it just, he looks talented, he looks good, he just doesn't look like a full-fledged wide receiver who's ready to step in and compete or step in and play at a high level for a Super Bowl contending team. I think he's going to have a role on this team. I think Matt LaFleur is going to know how to use him. I think he's going to be very much in that Tyler Ervin role from a season ago, who, by the way, had 142 snaps. Now, he was hurt some of the season. He also played one game where he actually played running back against San Francisco, but only 142 snaps. So I don't know that this role for Amari is going to be massive, but I think there's still going to be a role for him. But I love, before I get there, you go without Cobb, you're basically Adams, Lazard, and MVS with a younger Amari Rodgers as kind of your next guy up and playing some in the slot. And while I still think that's a good wide receiver group, it looks a lot better with Randall Cobb on it. And I love Devontae Adams as your alpha, your number one, your everything. I love kind of a platoon with MVS and Alan Lazard as your second outside guy. You know, if you're playing, 70 snaps of offense, they're both going to get slightly more than this, I think, but, right around 35 snaps a game for both of those guys sounds about right. Now, they're going to both see some time in the slot as well as Adams in the slot, and there's going to be some things like that as well. It's not just going to be Cobb full-time in the slot, but, right around 35 snaps for each of those guys. I like that. Is Lazard more of your power forward, possession receiver, blocking guy, MVS more of your deep threat, speed, run after the catch, all of that sort of stuff. I like those two platooning as kind of your number two. And then Randall Cobb is your slot, who's going to do a lot of the dirty work in the middle of the field. I don't think he's going to have insane numbers, right? But I think he's going to move the chains a lot. I think he's going to be able to kind of uncover in the red zone. We know how good he is at off-script plays with Aaron Rodgers. I think he's still going to have a ton of value. And I think just the overall depth and talent and resourcefulness that you have in that wide receiver room looks so much better now because Randall Cobb is there and he knows the offense and he knows Rodgers, and I guess is still learning Matt LaFleur's offense, but he's so on just on the same page as Aaron Rodgers, and I guarantee you Cobb's put the work in to know Matt LaFleur's offense already. I think this is going to be a really big trade in hindsight for Green Bay. And again, I was very skeptical of this going forward of all right, they're appeasing Aaron Rodgers, of course. I don't think he's going to add a ton to this team. They just drafted Amari Rodgers for this, but again, in hindsight, I think this looks like a really smart move, and I think it's really going to help the Packers this season. This is what Aaron Rodgers said about Cobb yesterday on the Pat McAfee show. So he said, quote, "There's been so many moments throughout camp where you're like, whoa," Rodgers explained on the Pat McAfee show on Wednesday, like, whoa, that was really bleeping smart, or whoa, that was an amazing play, or wow, he's still athletically super gifted, or I've never seen a shallow cross run that precisely. There's been one thing every single day that he's done that a lot of people have said, wow, that's why 12 wanted him so bad. That's why he's going to be an important part of what we're doing. We need him 100%. So that was Aaron Rodgers on the Pat McAfee show. So yes, was this a move to appease Aaron Rodgers? 1,000,000%. But I do think that this is going to be a move that's going to pay dividends for this Packers offense. And you just look at how well-rounded this offense feels now, right? Again, we talked about wide receiver, your alpha and Adams, your kind of platoon at number two between MVS and Lazard. Randall Cobb in the slot, Amari Rodgers is that gadget, Tyler Ervin type player. You've got every flavor that you need as on offense, right? Deep guy, possession guy, alpha guy, gadget guy, slot guy. You've got every single flavor that you need at wide receiver. At tight end, you've got alpha might be strong, but you've got your do-it-all tight end in Robert Tonyan. You've got your dirty work blocking tight end in Mercedes Lewis. And then you've got your H-back sort of slash tight ends who can do a little bit of everything in Josiah DeGuara and Dominique Daphne. You've got your overall sort of alpha running back in Aaron Jones. You've got your power back in A.J. Dillon. You've got more of your speed third down guy in Kylan Hill. You just look at the amount of talent and weapons that Aaron Rodgers is going to have at his disposal, and you feel really good about everything. And again, I always talk about those different types, those different flavors. They've got it at wide receiver. They've got it at tight end. They've got it at running back. And I think this is going to be a very exciting offense that has everything it needs, and Matt LaFleur and Aaron Rodgers have to be just kids in candy stores knowing that they have all of these weapons at their disposal, and especially Matt LaFleur knowing how to use all these guys. There's nothing he doesn't have. H-back, blocking tight end, again, all those different wide receivers, every type of running back. He's got it all. There's nothing he doesn't have to make his offense run really successfully. A lot of it's going to come down still to how well that offensive line blocks for everyone, but they've got a lot of really smart pieces there as well. I'm excited for this offense. I don't think there's any reason why it can't be a number one offense again this upcoming season. That's going to do it for me today. Thanks so much for joining me. Appreciate you as always. I'll be right back here tomorrow with an all-new episode. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.